All right, hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in once again to the Black Box Podcast, your Black Box online radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Now, when I first started this channel, it was going to be so much about true crime and even the upcoming election for president in 2020. When I was really starting this, I thought we would be talking about more things like the CIA and the FBI. And when I was out at the library the last time, I found a copy of this book here, The Art of Intelligence by Henry A. Crumpton, and the subtitle on this Lessons from a Life in the CIA's Clandestine Service. Now, the reasons why I wanted to talk about the CIA were I really had just sort of found that they really have a much larger influence on world affairs than a lot of people are giving them credit for in the mainstream media, except for the fact of, things like documentary films or even newscasts will throw in one line, in a US-led CIA-backed coup, they took out Mohammed Mossadegh in Iran or something like that, and they'll just throw in one sentence like that, and I had always been kind of like, well, what is that? And, we've just seen the recent passing of President George H.W. Bush, who is the only former head of the CIA to go on to become president. And, just coincidentally, he was one of the reasons why I got into, like learning more about the CIA in the past. While I was like learning more about George H.W. Bush, I came across the John Stockwell lectures. And John Stockwell was, of course, a former CIA officer. He was the highest ranking CIA officer to go public at the time, or as he said it, to go public and actually kind of tell the truth. And when you listen to him, Trees Lumumba's toothpaste and stuff like that, and is this guy for real? I didn't believe it at first. But, it's like a quick Google search will tell you that the CIA sued him for revealing their secrets because he published it in a book called In Search of Enemies. And I would really recommend his work, even if you're just like curious about the subject. I mean, like especially his two books, In Search of Enemies and The Praetorian Guard, maybe even The Praetorian Guard a little bit more. Because the whole John Stockwell thesis is that it's like the military industrial complex, like the arms companies are the second largest industry in the world, and we need a flow of money from Congress to the defense contractors, and thus the defense contract. From there, I really began to examine some things about how the CIA was very heavily involved in sort of, like a variety of world events, such as not only, we mentioned taking out Mohammed Mossadegh in Iran and installing the Shah, become a horribly brutal dictator and torturer. And like his, specialized task force, the DDS or DSD, they were trained in the United States. And about the destabilization of Chad and the installation of that brutal regime, you can see the film Talking About Rose. It's a sort of documentary on the subject. But I was just like, there are all of these sort of destabilizations that are going on. And let's look at a little section of the book here by Henry A. Crumpton. This is on page 125. Intelligence security services usually have led in covert action. In the United States, the CIA had this responsibility. There are several reasons for this. First, by definition, covert action is secret, and these agencies are structured for secret operations. Second, successful covert action requires specific intelligence that these agencies should collect. Third, these agencies should manage trusted foreign agents of influence to execute covert action operations. The management of these foreign agents requires tradecraft employed by intelligence services. Fourth, intelligence and security agencies should not have foreign policy agendas, although some do. I mean, that's like his little in parentheses there. And I was about to say, if we just look at that one particular sentence, that they should not have some sort of foreign policy agenda, well, what are we talking about here? I mean, once again, Iran, Chile, Chad, all of these nations that are getting, messed up by the CIA, Yes, it's for foreign policy agendas. It's for geostrategic positioning. I mean, specifically Chad, because they wanted to do something to Muammar Gaddafi. They wanted to put pressure on him in that particular way. I believe the exact line was Ronald Reagan wanted to bloody Gaddafi's nose or something like that. And, what did Henry Kissinger say about Chile, about taking out Salvador Allende? They did not want to wait for the democratic process to take its course. Henry Kissinger also made the famous statement, the illegal we do immediately, the unconstitutional takes a little bit longer. And Iran, of course, is very famous. You know that one with Mohammad Mossadegh. It relates to things like Anglo oil and stuff like that. But with when it comes to Henry Kissinger, John Stockwell would talk about him, and he would say like he attended meetings with Henry Kissinger, and one time Kissinger didn't get to sit in the chair that he wanted, so he just turned his chair around backwards and then just sat facing the wall and just refused to answer any questions in a meeting that dealt with the lives of thousands of people. And like, I mean, Henry Kissinger, we could talk about him for hours, like whether like the real story about Henry Kissinger is there's some very big theories about the CIA where it's not just that they are pushing a foreign policy agenda that is leading to destruction. I mean, we've mentioned Webster Tarpley on this channel before. We've mentioned, the Tax Wall Street Party, and they have this whole argument that the CIA is the private arm of the global elites. And Daniela Walls, the chairperson of the Tax Wall Street Party, has talked a lot about that, and that's a bold statement. And that gets very, very conspiratorial because they also say that Al Qaeda is completely run by the CIA. And this book here that I have, it goes into some things about the Middle East, and I'm going to be maybe doing another upload as we go through some of that. From what I've read so far in the book, it talks a lot about Africa. And John Stockwell, the man that I mentioned, was from the Angola operation specifically. Then the CIA was doing some stuff in Angola, and the operation got shut down actually because there was an American professor in Angola who recognized that the CIA was kind of manipulating the geopolitical scene. He discovered this through his own research, and what he did was he called his senator in California, and I believe it was I want to say it was a professor from the University of Southern California at USC, but that maybe that detail has escaped me. And he called his senator, and then he alerted them of what the CIA was doing, and then the Senate shut it down. So it's like we still have some balances of power in the United States government. But there's also something that was mentioned in the news recently, post Mike Pompeo, remember our current Secretary of State CIA, and what they were saying was that is they are part of the executive branch, not like the legislative or the judicial. But how many branches of government do we have? Well, there are a lot of people that think that the CIA is its own separate branch of government. We have executive, legislative, judicial, the CIA, and the electorate. I mean, I would definitely agree that the electorate is a branch of government. The voters, the constituents, whatever you'd like to call it, because they are a form of check and balance. They are a form of, well, they are the government. I think we've talked about this in the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez upload I did about how the government is comprised of citizens, right? We don't have kings. We don't have aristocrats. We don't have, monarchs. We have, well, human beings, ordinary people who don't have any higher status based on their birth and bloodline. So the electorate is a branch of government. And but the reason why would they call the CIA its own separate branch of government? Well, they're saying that they're allowed to function without an enormous amount of examination from the other branches, not to mention the entire meddling of geopolitical affairs, that those things can happen without any sort of check and balance. So it's almost like we would have those four branches that I mentioned, and then the CIA can kind of weave in and out as they want, like destabilizing certain parts of the world for military and geopolitical benefit. But who are they benefiting? Well, what John Stockwell argues is that they're benefiting mostly the arms companies. That's in search of enemies. They're trying to start conflicts because it is profitable. It's like for-profit warmongering. But you got to be very careful though when you just sort of listen to that, and he might be saying things that are very genuine, but when we want to look at somebody like Kevin Shipp, for example, who's another CIA officer who went public, and he has YouTube lectures, and he's former CIA, but the things that he talks about, I really have talked to people who are ex-military and ex-academics, and they really are not in line with the Kevin Shipp school of thought. I didn't mention him by name, but the whole concept that he mentions about global elites and running things for-profit warmongering in the Middle East, it's like when you talk to people who are ex-military and academics, they're just like, no, absolutely not. I mean, and we mentioned the Tax Wall Street Party as well, like the whole concept of the CIA creating Al Qaeda, and Al Qaeda is the private arm of the CIA. I mean, somebody who was a former military intelligence, even called me a moron and retarded. Excuse me for using that word, but that's what he called me for talking about this on a forum once. Kind of just the way I am now, just sort of putting out that this is what people are saying. I was like, excuse me, why do you? Well, then, like what he explained was that he's like, hey, sorry for the name calling. It's just I was a former military intelligence, and that's not what's happening. It's not happening like that. I mean, the military industrial complex is not what people say it is. And what I've really gathered about that is, they even discuss this, in the film Cube, where they say there is no vast conspiracy. This is just the way that things are happening. It's not calculated. And he said something kind of to that effect. And he also just sort of said, like, the political situation in the Middle East just got out of control. And a lot of the things that happen, about terrorism, it was just the situation got out of control and the military just couldn't control what was happening. And, I mean, we do have conflicts all over the world. And, for someone like me, who is an outsider to all this, who is just, reading books and watching videos and, reading articles online, that it's like, you can only, go do so much. You just have to go through the interpretation of evidence. But there are some interesting things, though. Like, I would also say that I would highly recommend everybody read Jeremy Scahill's article in The Nation about the CIA and Somalia. In Somalia, they argue that they found a sort of second Guantanamo Bay run by the CIA in Mogadishu. And, they go through some interviews about people who went there. And when I said, though, that I was starting this channel and I was thinking about doing more things associated with the CIA, I actually wanted to put forth an argument that the CIA was destabilizing Yemen for kind of just a for-profit warmongering sort of shtick on that. And I mean, the CIA has a base in Mogadishu, and they also have one in the Seychelles. And the one in the Seychelles is more for drone strikes, like like kind of drone command. And in Mogadishu, they're actually housing prisoners and stuff like that. And once again, Jeremy Scahill wrote an article about the CIA and their sort of second Guantanamo in Mogadishu, Somalia. But I mean, like, you have to really kind of, hope that people are being honest and genuine when they're putting things out. And there's also another book out there called Deadly Deceit by Ralph McGeehee. I haven't read that one, but I've seen Ralph McGeehee appear in a handful of documentaries. There was one documentary that he appeared in called just Dark Secrets of the CIA, I believe. And not him, but one of the other installments in that. It was like maybe not the best film because there were only like three people in it and they just each told like a sort of 15-minute story or something like that. And but the third story in that one was one guy was with the CIA and he actually had an assignment in Cuba, and his job was to poison the milk supply of a school cafeteria, poisoning milk for children to drink. And they do something, they do some crazy stuff, if that is true, which, I mean, once again, I'm a total outsider on these things. And my family once asked me, like, have you ever thought about working with the CIA? And I was like, I mean, they had some reasons to ask me that. And I was just like, no, they kill people. I mean, it's like, they do some horrific things, and at the same time, though, when a lot of people think of the CIA, maybe they'll think of Ben Affleck and Argo and something like that, and also with that thing that we read right here from Henry Crumpton's book, when he says like the ambition of something like this really should just be to gather intelligence, to not have a foreign policy agenda, although some, well, yes, I mean, that's a very profound statement. An intelligence service can execute covert action that conforms to policy, at least in principle. I mean, when I hear something like that, that's kind of like, I guess this would be sort of be an ideal that we want to strive for, because all of these people that we've been talking about, whether it's John Stockwell, Kevin Shipp, Webster Tarpley, Daniela Walls, Ralph McGehee, they all seem to be arguing that people in the CIA are participating in a foreign policy agenda, and that they're like, they want to destabilize nations because it is beneficial to other groups of people. And you could call them oligarchs, you could call them the elites. So many theories talk about the elites. And like, when I would listen to John Stockwell, it was like he was almost saying things that could be said by Alex Jones. But the thing is, we really have to recognize, though, that John Stockwell has a little more credibility than Alex Jones. But it's like, I mean, he did a little bit better job about backing up the points, but Alex Jones is all about global elites manipulating things behind the scenes. And, I don't think that Alex Jones is a very credible person. But at the same time, we now have mainstream history sources saying the CIA destabilized Iran, the CIA destabilized Chile, the CIA destabilized Chad, and we haven't even talked about Manuel Noriega in Panama. We haven't even talked about Nicaragua and Iran-Contra. I mean, like, there actually is one of those things that Ronald Reagan's most frequently used word during his presidency was Contras. And we did mention a few things in Cuba, and it's like, excuse me, the CIA was really very, very anti-Cuban, very anti-Gaddafi, and anti-Gaddafi in Libya, that is. But they were also. But the thing is, it's like we could just, we could spend 30 more uploads on the CIA here, and we can always explore that theory I mentioned that the CIA is responsible for the destabilization of Yemen, totally for geostrategic positioning. But I know that's a bold thing to say, and once again, though, I do have to admit, I'm not someone who has dealt with any of this firsthand. So one of the reasons why I backed off from things like this on the channel was I thought about if I'm putting out, theories about what the CIA is currently doing, then that's almost kind of overstepping my reach and realm of authority. Like, I mean, but when I'm just sort of reading some things out of a book, hey, this guy wrote a book, let's discuss that. Those are the social commentary things that I like to explore. Like, did the ideas in this book make sense? Let's compare them to these other books on the CIA and these other books on, military intelligence, and let's, have a conversation about these articles or something like that. That stuff we can do on this podcast, but it's not easy to try and interpret what an entire intelligence agency is doing behind the scenes when none of that material is currently public, and you could be sort of sharing a certain amount of disinfo, if you will. So we always have to bear in mind that people on the internet might not always be sharing things that are 100% genuine. I mean, when it comes to somebody like Kevin Shipp, like, once again, I really do have to insinuate, it seems like he has some genuine kind of insider information about the CIA, but then he kind of blended it in with all of these kind of global elite super conspiracies, and I'm not sure what to make of that. We haven't talked about Evan McMullin yet, the former presidential candidate. He got a lot of votes in Utah. I actually cited Evan McMullin in my master's thesis for an op-ed that he wrote about authoritarianism, and it's like, he is once again someone who was not being, I was about to say not being super conspiratorial, but I guess he did do his share of that stuff. But once again, it's like the CIA is becoming more and more public, more people are speaking out about things. And just to give one last recap of the books that I would recommend about the CIA: In Search of Enemies by John Stockwell, The Praetorian Guard, also by John Stockwell, Deadly Deceit by Ralph McGehee, as well as the film Talking About Rose, which was about Chad. And then we have you find some sources on Salvador Allende in Chile, and what was it? The Newsweek articles about Manuel Noriega in Panama. They also made a film called Noriega. What was it called? Noriega, God's Messenger, the one with Bob Hoskins. And then we would have some Jeremy Scahill's article in The Nation about Mogadishu. I mean, that is a it's a very long, detailed article. It's not just like 500 words. It's very much more than that. Maybe we'll do some more in-depth things on here, but I really think that it's just very fascinating that so many mainstream agencies are just recognizing that the CIA destabilized these nations like Iran and Chile, and it's totally acceptable now. That's just an acceptable thing that you hear about in high school. We might have even heard that in my like high school world history class or something like that, but everyone is so casual and nonchalant about it. But it is what it is. Also, one last thing, I would also recommend that people check out John Perkins, who wrote the book Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And he has interviews online if you want to just kind of like I really found out about him first because of some of the interviews he did promoting the book Confessions of an Economic Hitman, which he sort of had something very similar when he was like, when people are talking about destabilization, it's like destabilization of a foreign country is done in three ways. First, they try to do it economically, and if that fails, like manipulating the economic situation of a country, if that fails, the second thing they do is they bring in groups called the jackals. And these are people who are supposed to cause internal uprisings, and they are meant to cause, things like internal revolutions and calamities. And the third thing that they do if the jackals fail and if the economic controls fail is then they have a full-scale military invasion, something like the war in Iraq. Once again, that's those are all his words. Like not really mine, I'm just kind of putting it out there. And once again, his book is called Confessions of an Economic Hitman by John Perkins, and he has some others out there too. All right, well, that's all for me now. And once again, the book that I'm just starting today is The Art of Intelligence, Lessons from a Life in the CIA's Clandestine Service by Henry A. Crumpton. And maybe we'll do a few more things on this one. Well, that's all for me now. Until next time.